Across the galaxy, legends speak of creatures so fierce that entire star systems have fallen silent at their approach. The Kithara, living weapons of mass destruction, each one capable of reducing planets to ash and bone. For 3,000 years, these beasts have been the ultimate trump card of the Zephyrian Empire, unstoppable forces that bow to no master and fear no enemy. Military academies teach that controlling a Kithara is impossible. Scientists have tried everything from neural implants to psychic manipulation. Warlords have offered fortunes, planets, even their own lives for the secret. Every attempt has ended the same way, in screaming, tearing death. But what happens when the most dangerous predator in the universe encounters something it has never seen before? What occurs when a force of nature meets the one species that refuses to accept the word impossible? Sometimes the most profound power doesn't come from strength, technology, or fear. Sometimes it comes from a simple word, spoken with absolute certainty by someone too young to know it shouldn't work. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became its ultimate strength, and how a child's voice silenced the roar that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. The observation deck of the research station Meridian fell silent as the massive shape moved through the asteroid field below. Doctor. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the reinforced viewport, her breath fogging the cold surface as she watched the creature that had haunted her nightmares for the past 6 months. The Kithara was magnificent in its horror. Easily the size of a small frigate, its obsidian carapace gleamed with an inner fire that pulsed like a heartbeat. 6 limbs, each ending in claws that could slice through starship hull plating, propelled it through the vacuum with impossible grace. But it was the head that made seasoned soldiers weep, a elongated skull filled with rows of crystalline teeth, and eyes that burned with intelligence far older and more alien than anything humanity had ever encountered. "Status report," Elena called out, never taking her eyes off the beast. Behind her, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen checked her instruments for the 100th time that hour, still maintaining distance of approximately 2 kilometers. No aggressive movements detected, but the psionic emanations are off the charts. Whatever that thing is thinking, it's thinking hard. Elena nodded grimly. The Kithara had been following their research vessel for 3 days now, ever since they'd stumbled across it feeding on the wreckage of a Zephyrian warfleet. The sight had been beyond horrific, the creature methodically tearing apart dreadnoughts like a child dismantling toys, consuming both metal and flesh with equal appetite. Dr. Vasquez called out Communications Officer Torres from his station. "We're receiving another transmission from the Zephyrian command ship. Admiral Krex is demanding we transfer custody of the specimen immediately." Elena's jaw tightened. The Zephyrian Empire had been humanity's reluctant ally for barely 2 years, and already they were showing their true colors. The arrogant reptilian species viewed humans as useful but ultimately expendable partners in their galactic expansion. "Tell Admiral Krex that this is a joint operation under the Meridian Accords," she replied firmly. "We found the creature first, and our research protocols take precedence." Through the viewport, the Kithara suddenly shifted, its burning eyes turning toward the station as if it had heard every word. Elena felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the station's recycled atmosphere. "Ma'am," Chen's voice carried a note of concern. "I'm reading massive energy spikes from the creature. It's like it's charging up for something." Before Elena could respond, the communication system crackled to life with an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display shimmered, revealing the scaled visage of Admiral Krex, his golden eyes blazing with barely contained fury. "Human," the Zephyrian hissed, his translator giving his words a metallic edge. "You play with forces beyond your comprehension. The Kithara are weapons of the ancient gods, not subjects for your primitive experiments." Elena stepped forward, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. "Admiral, with respect, your people have been trying to control these creatures for 3 millennia without success. Perhaps it's time for a fresh perspective." Krex's neck frill flared in the Zephyrian equivalent of a laugh. "Fresh perspective? Your species has barely crawled out of your gravity well." "You know nothing of the Kithara's true nature. They are death incarnate, chaos given form. The wisest course is to destroy it before it destroys us all." "And waste the greatest scientific discovery in galactic history?" Elena shook her head. "I don't think so." The transmission cut off abruptly as proximity alarms began blaring throughout the station. Through the viewport, Elena watched in fascination and terror as the Kithara began to move, not toward them, but towards something else entirely. "Contact bearing 27 Mark 4, Torres reported, his voice tight with tension. Single small craft. Looks like a civilian transport. Elena's blood ran cold. The Meridian system was supposed to be under quarantine, completely empty of civilian traffic. Can you identify the vessel? Working on it now. Torres's fingers flew over his console. Got it. It's the freighter Lucky Strike, registered out of New Earth Colony. According to the manifest, it's carrying mining equipment to the Outer Rim territories. How the hell did they get past the blockade? Chen demanded. Elena was already moving toward the communication station. Get me a channel to that ship immediately. We need to warn them. The screen flickered to life, revealing the weather-beaten face of Captain Jake Morrison, a grizzled spacer who looked like he'd been hauling cargo since before humanity discovered faster-than-light travel. Behind him, Elena could see the cramped bridge of an aging freighter. This is Captain Morrison of the Lucky Strike, he said, his voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd run blockades before. I don't know what kind of military exercise you folks are running out here, but I've got a schedule to keep. Elena Vasquez of the Research Station Meridian. You need to reverse course immediately. There's an extremely dangerous alien creature in this system. Morrison's weathered face creased into a skeptical grin. Lady, I've been flying these routes for 20 years. I've seen everything the galaxy has to throw at me. I think I can handle whatever bogey you're worried about. Before Elena could respond, a new voice cut into the transmission. Young, curious, and completely unafraid. Dad, what's that big thing outside? It's really pretty. Elena's heart nearly stopped as a child appeared in the frame beside Captain Morrison. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with unruly brown hair and bright, intelligent eyes that spoke of too many hours spent staring out at the stars. Tommy, get back to your quarters, Morrison said sharply, but the damage was already done. Through the viewport, Elena could see the Kythara's massive head turning toward the small freighter like a predator scenting prey. Captain, you need to listen to me very carefully, Elena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The creature tracking your ship is called a Kythara. It's a living weapon that's destroyed entire fleets. Your only chance is to power down all systems and hope it loses interest. Morrison's expression finally showed the first hint of real concern. Power down? Lady, if I shut down my engines in an asteroid field, I'll be smashed to pieces in 10 minutes. Hey, Dad. The boy's voice carried a note of wonder. It's coming closer. I think it wants to play. Elena watched in horror as the Kythara began accelerating toward the Lucky Strike, its massive form cutting through the vacuum like a missile. The creature's bioluminescent organs pulsed faster now, casting eerie shadows across the asteroid field. Evasive maneuvers, Morrison shouted to someone off-screen. All power to engines. The freighter's ion drives flared to life, pushing the vessel into a desperate climb away from the approaching predator. For a moment, Elena dared to hope they might escape. The Lucky Strike was old but well-maintained, and Morrison was clearly an experienced pilot, but the Kythara was faster. Elena watched helplessly as the creature overtook the fleeing ship in seconds, its massive claws reaching out to ensnare the vessel. The freighter's hull groaned under the pressure as the beast's grip tightened, metal screaming against organic armor. Hull breach on decks 2 and 3, Morrison reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but not for long. Through the communication link, Elena could hear the terrified cries of the freighter's crew, the wail of emergency klaxons, and underneath it all, the sound of the Kythara's claws scraping against metal like fingernails on a chalkboard. But then something unexpected happened. The boy, Tommy, pushed forward to the communication console, his young face pressed against the screen. Don't be scared, Dad, he said quietly. It's not trying to hurt us. Look at its eyes. Elena found herself following the child's gaze through the viewport. The Kythara's burning orbs were indeed fixed on the freighter, but there was something different about their intensity. Not the cold hunger she'd seen when it was feeding, but something else. Something almost like curiosity. The creature is slowing its advance, Chen reported, disbelief evident in her voice. Energy readings are dropping back to baseline levels. Through the communication link, Tommy had somehow gotten closer to the nearest viewport on his father's ship. Elena watched in amazement as the boy pressed his small hand against the transparasteel, staring directly into the Kythara's massive eye. Hi there, the child said softly, his voice carrying clearly through the communication system. Are you lonely? You seem lonely. What happened next defied everything humanity knew about Kythara behavior. The creature's massive head tilted slightly, like a dog trying to understand a new sound. Its grip on the freighter loosened, claws withdrawing just enough to stop the hull from buckling further. Impossible, Elena whispered. Dad, I think it understands me, Tommy continued, still staring into the alien's eye. Can I talk to it some more? Captain Morrison was looking at his son like he'd never seen him before. Tommy, that thing could tear us apart in seconds. But it won't, the boy replied with the absolute certainty that only children possess. It's just scared and angry because no one talks to it nice. Everyone always runs away or tries to hurt it. Elena felt her scientific mind racing. Everything they knew about Kythara psychology suggested they were incapable of complex emotion, driven only by territorial aggression and feeding instincts. Yet here was an 8-year-old boy claiming the creature was lonely and scared. More impossibly, the evidence seemed to support his theory. The Kythara's bioluminescent patterns had shifted from the angry reds and oranges of aggression to softer blues and purples. Its posture had relaxed, massive shoulders dropping as tension seemed to flow out of its alien form. Dr. Vasquez, Torres called out, excitement evident in his voice. I'm reading massive changes in the creature's psionic emanations. The aggressive patterns are completely gone, replaced by something I've never seen before. Elena moved back to the communication console, her mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. Tommy, can you hear me? The boy looked up from the viewport. Yes, ma'am. Are you the scientist lady? The one who wants to study the space dragon? Space dragon? Despite the situation, Elena found herself smiling. Is that what you call it? Well, it looks like a dragon, Tommy said matter-of-factly, just bigger and with more claws. And it lives in space instead of a cave. Through the viewport, Elena watched the Kythera's head move closer to the freighter, but slowly now, with what almost looked like caution. The creature seemed to be studying the small human face pressed against the transparent steel. Tommy, Elena said carefully, I want you to try something for me. Can you tell the space dragon that we want to be friends? The boy nodded solemnly. Okay. He turned back to the viewport, placing both hands flat against the surface. We want to be your friends, space dragon. We're not going to hurt you. Nobody should have to be alone in the dark all the time. The response was immediate and shocking. The Kythara's massive form began to emit a low, resonant sound that vibrated through both ships. It wasn't the shriek of aggression that had been recorded in previous encounters, but something else entirely, a deep, musical note that seemed to come from the very core of the creature's being. It's singing, Chen whispered in amazement. Elena could hardly believe her instruments. The psionic readings showed patterns of incredible complexity, far more sophisticated than anything they'd detected from Terran whales or dolphins. This wasn't just animal vocalization, it was communication. Dad, Tommy said, his voice filled with wonder. I think it's trying to sing to us. Captain Morrison stared at his son, then at the massive predator that was somehow serenading their ship. This is impossible. These things are supposed to be mindless killing machines. Maybe they're not mindless, Elena said softly.
Maybe we just never tried talking to them before. The implications were staggering.
If the Kythara were intelligent, truly intelligent, then every military engagement with them for the past 3,000 years had been a form of genocide.
The Zephyrian Empire had been systematically hunting and destroying a sentient species. Vasquez, Tommy's voice cut through her thoughts. The space dragon wants to know why the scaled people keep trying to hurt it. It says its family is all gone because of them. Elena felt her blood turn to ice. The boy was somehow communicating with the creature on a level that shouldn't have been possible. Tommy, how do you know what's saying? The child looked at her with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a particularly slow adult. It shows me pictures in my head. Happy pictures of lots of space dragons playing together, and then sad pictures of the scaled people coming with big ships and making them all go away. Elena's hands were shaking as she activated the long-range communication array. This changed everything. If humanity could communicate with the Kythara, if they could understand their perspective, it might be possible to prevent a war that had been brewing for millennia. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes. The communication board lit up with an incoming priority transmission from Admiral Krex. The Zephyrian's scaled face appeared on screen, his expression murderous. Human scientists, he hissed, our sensors indicate that the creature has achieved some form of psychic contact with your vessel. This cannot be allowed to continue. We are moving to destroy both the Kythara and any ship that has been contaminated by its influence. Elena's heart sank as she saw the tactical display update with new contacts. 3 Zephyrian destroyers were moving into attack formation, their weapons powering up for a full assault. Admiral, please, Elena began, but Krex cut her off. The decision has been made. Any species capable of communicating with the Kythara poses an unacceptable threat to galactic security. Prepare to be terminated. The transmission ended, leaving Elena staring at the tactical display in horror. In less than 5 minutes, the Zephyrian ships would be in firing position. The research station's shields might survive the initial barrage, but the Lucky Strike had no defensive capabilities at all. Dr. Vasquez, Tommy's voice was small and frightened now. The Space Dragon says the Scaled people are coming to hurt us all. It wants to protect us, but it doesn't know how many friends they have. Elena looked out at the Kythara, its massive form still cradling the freighter with surprising gentleness. For 3,000 years, these creatures had been portrayed as monsters, but what if they were simply defending themselves against an empire that refused to acknowledge their intelligence? What if humanity had just discovered the galaxy's most persecuted species?
The tactical display painted a grim picture as the 3 Zephyrian destroyers closed in on their position.
Elena watched the countdown timer tick away precious seconds while her mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios.
The research station's defensive capabilities were designed for asteroid impacts and solar radiation, not military-grade plasma cannons. Dr. Vasquez, Chen's voice was tight with controlled fear. The Zephyrian ships will be in optimal firing position in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Recommend we begin evacuation procedures immediately. Elena shook her head, her eyes fixed on the massive form of the Kythara still cradling the Lucky Strike. There's nowhere to evacuate to, Sarah. Our escape pods would be sitting ducks, and the Zephyrians have made it clear they consider us contaminated. Through the communication link, she could see Tommy Morrison still pressed against his ship's viewport. His small hands splayed against the transparent steel as he maintained some form of contact with the creature. The boy's father stood behind him, one hand on his son's shoulder, his weathered face a mask of protective determination. "Tommy!" Elena called out. "Can you ask the Space Dragon if it understands what's happening? If it knows the Scaled people want to hurt all of us? Or—" The boy nodded solemnly, his young face creased with concentration. For several long moments, the only sound was the gentle hum of the station's life support systems and the distant rumble of the Kythara's subsonic vocalizations. "It knows," Tommy finally said, his voice subdued. "It's really sad because this always happens. Whenever it tries to make friends, the Scaled people come and make everything hurt. It says its name is. I can't say it right. It sounds like wind through crystal caves." Elena felt her heart break a little at the simple tragedy in the child's words. Here was a creature of immense power and intelligence, condemned to solitude by an empire that refused to acknowledge its personhood. "Can you tell it that we want to help? That humans are different from the Scaled people?" Tommy tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. "It wants to know why. Why are you different? Everyone else either runs away scared or tries to hurt it." Elena moved closer to the communication console, addressing both the boy and the creature she couldn't directly perceive. "Because we believe that intelligence is precious, no matter what form it takes, because we think friendship is better than fear." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Kythara's massive form began to pulse with bioluminescent patterns that Elena had never seen before, complex spirals of gold and silver that seemed to flow like liquid light across its carapace. The creature's song changed too, becoming something that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated in the bones. "It's beautiful," Tommy whispered, tears streaming down his young face. "It's saying thank you. It's been so long since anyone said they wanted to be friends." Torres suddenly straightened at his console, his fingers dancing across the controls. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the creature. Not aggressive patterns, but something else entirely. It's like it's charging up." Elena felt a chill of apprehension. Charging up for what? Her question was answered as the space around the Kythara began to shimmer with barely visible distortions. Reality seemed to bend and twist, creating pockets of altered space-time that made the eyes water to look at directly. "Impossible," Chen breathed. "Those readings. It's manipulating local space-time on a macro scale. The energy requirements alone should be beyond any biological organism." Elena stared at the creature with new understanding. The Kythara weren't just intelligent predators. They were beings capable of manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe. No wonder the Zephyrian Empire feared them. 2 minutes to weapons range, Torres announced, his voice cutting through Elena's revelation. "The destroyers are maintaining attack formation." Elena made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Tommy, I need you to ask the space dragon something very important.
Can it protect itself from the scaled people's weapons? The boy was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing increasingly troubled.
It says yes, but
if it fights back, lots of people will die. It doesn't want to hurt anyone, even the scaled people who want to hurt it.
Elena felt tears she didn't know she was capable of shedding. Here was a creature with the power to level cities, possibly planets, and it was concerned about the moral implications of self-defense.
Tell it that sometimes we have to protect the people we care about, she said softly. Tell it that good people don't let bullies hurt their friends. The Kithara's response came not through Tommy's translation, but through a direct psionic pulse that every human in the system felt simultaneously.
It was a sensation of infinite sadness mixed with grim determination, the mental signature of someone preparing to do something necessary but distasteful.
90 seconds to weapons range, Torres called out.
Elena activated the general communication channel, broadcasting to all ships in the system. Admiral Krex, I'm begging you to reconsider. The Kithara is not a mindless weapon. It's a sapient being capable of communication and empathy. We can end 3,000 years of war with dialogue instead of violence. The Zephyrian's response was immediate and harsh. Your contamination is more complete than we feared, human. The Kithara are abominations that must be cleansed from the galaxy. Their very existence is an affront to natural order. Elena's scientific mind reeled at the implications of that statement. Natural order? Admiral, you're talking about genocide. About the systematic extermination of an intelligent species. Intelligence? Krex's neck frill flared wide with contempt. They are parasites that feed on thinking beings, consuming not just flesh but memories, experiences, the very essence of consciousness. They are the galaxy's nightmare given form.
Elena felt the pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. They feed on consciousness? Admiral, what if you have it backwards? What if they're not parasites, but
something else entirely? Before Krex could respond, Tommy's voice cut across the communication channel with startling clarity. The space dragon says the scaled people are wrong, the boy announced, his young voice carrying an authority that seemed far beyond his years. It doesn't eat thoughts. It remembers them. When someone dies, it keeps their memories safe so they won't be lost forever. Elena's breath caught in her throat. If Tommy was right, if the Kithara weren't predators but rather some form of cosmic archivists, then the Zephyrian Empire had been slaughtering the galaxy's librarians for 3 millennia. 30 seconds to weapons range, Torres announced. Elena watched the tactical display with growing desperation. The Zephyrian destroyers were spreading out in a classic pincer formation, designed to prevent their target from escaping in any direction. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. That's when the Kithara began to sing again. This time, the sound was different. Not the gentle melody it had shared with Tommy, but something primal and powerful that seemed to reach across space itself. Elena felt the song in her bones, in her blood, in the quantum spaces between her thoughts. And then space began to answer. The first sign was a distortion in the asteroid field, rocks beginning to move in patterns that defied Newtonian physics. Then the stars themselves seemed to flicker, as if reality was having trouble deciding what should exist and where. Energy readings are off the charts, Chen reported, her voice barely audible over the increasing intensity of the Kithara's song. It's not just manipulating local space-time anymore, it's calling something. Elena felt her hair stand on end as the fundamental forces of the universe began to respond to the creature's summons. This wasn't just biological ability, this was something approaching godlike power. Dr. Vasquez, Tommy's voice was filled with awe and a little fear. The space dragon says its family is coming. The ones the scaled people thought were all gone? They've been hiding in the deep dark between the stars, but now they're coming home. Elena's instruments went haywire as massive shapes began to materialize throughout the system. Not the violent emergence of ships dropping out of hyperspace, but the gradual materialization of beings that had been existing in dimensions parallel to normal space-time. More Kithara. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Each one was unique in size and coloration, ranging from creatures smaller than shuttlecraft to titans that dwarfed heavy cruisers. But all of them carried the same bioluminescent patterns, the same haunting song that seemed to weave reality itself into new configurations. Admiral Krex's voice crackled over the communication channel, no longer commanding but edged with genuine terror. Impossible. Our long-range sensors showed no signs of Cathara activity in this sector.
That's because they weren't in this sector, Elena realized aloud. They were in the spaces between sectors, existing in dimensional folds that our instruments can't detect. The tactical display had become useless as conventional physics broke down around them.
The Zephyrian destroyers found their targeting systems unable to lock onto creatures that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Plasma bolts fired into empty space where massive forms had been a split second before, only to pass harmlessly through dimensional echoes.
But the Cathara weren't attacking. Instead, they were arranging themselves in a complex pattern around the human ships, their bioluminescent displays creating something that looked like writing, vast letters of light spelled out across the darkness of space.
"Tommy!" Elena called out urgently. "Can you read what they're saying?" The boy pressed his face against the viewport, his eyes wide with wonder. "They're not saying words. They're showing their history, all the places they've been, all the people they've remembered. It's like a big book made of light."
Elena watched in amazement as the Cathara's display shifted and changed, showing images that seemed to bypass the eyes and speak directly to the mind.
She saw civilizations rising and falling, species taking their first tentative steps into space, the birth and death of stars. And through it all, the Cathara were there, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as witnesses. "They're the galaxy's memory keepers," she whispered. "They preserve the experiences and knowledge of every species they encounter, making sure nothing is truly lost to time." The implications were staggering. If the Cathara were indeed responsible for preserving the accumulated knowledge and experience of countless civilizations, then the Zephyrian Empire had been conducting a war against the galaxy's own collective unconscious. Admiral Crex's voice, when it came, was hollow with the weight of dawning realization. "The ancient texts, they spoke of the memory keepers, beings who would preserve the thoughts and dreams of all sapient life. But we thought they were myths." "Not myths," Elena said quietly, "just misunderstood." The Cathara's song began to shift again, and Elena felt something unprecedented happening. The creatures were extending their consciousness outward, offering to share their vast accumulated memory with anyone willing to accept it. Elena felt the touch of alien thought at the edges of her mind, not invasive or threatening, but offering, requesting permission. She opened herself to the experience, and suddenly found herself seeing the galaxy through eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000,000 civilizations. She saw the first Zephyrian settlements, a proud but frightened species taking their initial steps into a hostile universe. She witnessed their first encounter with the Cathara, the misunderstanding that had led to conflict, and the gradual hardening of fear into hatred over generations. But she also saw other species, other first contacts that had ended differently, civilizations that had learned to communicate with the memory keepers, sharing their experiences and dreams in exchange for the wisdom of ages. Peaceful coexistences that had lasted for eons before being disrupted by the expanding Zephyrian Empire. "Vasquez." Tommy's voice brought her back to the present. "The space dragons want to know if humans will help them make peace with the scaled people. They're tired of running and hiding. They want to come home." Elena looked around at the massive forms surrounding their tiny research station. Beings of incredible power and ancient wisdom, who wanted nothing more than to share their memories and preserve the experiences of all thinking life. "Tell them yes," she said firmly. "Tell them that humans believe in second chances, and that some of us think peace is always worth fighting for." The response from the Cathara collective was overwhelming, a wave of gratitude and hope that swept through the system like a solar wind made of pure emotion. For the first time in 3,000 years, the memory keepers had found allies who saw them as something other than monsters. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. Convincing the Zephyrian Empire to abandon their holy war against the Cathara would be a challenge that made first contact seem simple by comparison. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that forces far more powerful than admirals and emperors were already moving to prevent any such reconciliation. 6 months after first contact, Elena stood in the observation lounge of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, watching the most unprecedented gathering in galactic history unfold before her eyes. Representatives from 47 different species had come to witness what would either be the dawn of a new age of understanding or the beginning of the galaxy's most catastrophic war. The neutral zone had been established in the Kepler system, a barren collection of rocky worlds and dead moons that served as the perfect backdrop for humanity's most ambitious diplomatic effort. Human, Zephyrian, and Cathara vessels maintained careful distances from each other, their weapons powered down but ready, while smaller neutral ships ferried diplomats and observers between the various fleets. Elena absently touched the neural interface behind her right ear still adjusting to the quantum communicator that allowed her to maintain contact with the Kithara collective. The device was a marvel of human-Kithara cooperation, developed over months of careful collaboration between Dr. L. Chen's team and beings whose understanding of consciousness transcended anything humanity had previously imagined. Dr. Vasquez. The voice belonged to Ambassador Sarah Chen, Elena's former colleague who had been promoted to lead humanity's first xenological diplomatic corps. The Zephyrian delegation has arrived. Emperor Vex himself is here. Elena turned from the viewport to see Chen approaching, her diplomatic uniform crisp despite the stress lines around her eyes. The past 6 months had aged all of them, but none more than those tasked with preventing an interstellar war. How bad is it? Elena asked. Chen's expression was grim. 3 of his generals are calling for immediate military action. They're claiming the Kithara's recent demonstrations constitute acts of war preparation. Elena sighed. The demonstrations Chen referred to were the result of the Kithara collective's attempts to communicate with other species throughout the galaxy. As more civilizations learned to interface with the memory keepers, they were gaining access to historical records that painted the Zephyrian Empire in an increasingly unfavorable light. What about the Kithara? Are they ready for this? As ready as they can be, Chen replied. Though I have to admit, having beings who can manipulate space-time sitting at a negotiation table is somewhat unnerving, even when they're on our side. Elena nodded, understanding the sentiment. The Kithara's abilities went far beyond what humanity had initially observed. They could fold space to travel instantaneously across vast distances, alter local gravity fields, and, most disturbing to military minds, phase partially out of normal reality to become effectively invulnerable to conventional weapons. Where's Tommy? Elena asked. Chen's expression softened slightly. In the communication chamber with his father. The boy still refuses to be separated from his space dragon, as he calls the collective. Elena couldn't help but smile at that. Tommy Morrison had become the galaxy's first official human Kithara translator, his unique ability to interface with their consciousness making him invaluable to the diplomatic process. The 8-year-old boy had already sat in on more high-level negotiations than most career diplomats. Vasquez, Ambassador Chen, the ship's communication officer, approached them with obvious urgency. Emperor Vex is requesting an immediate private audience. He says it's a matter of galactic security. Elena and Chen exchanged glances. Private audiences with the Zephyrian Emperor were never good news. 20 minutes later, they found themselves in the Harmony's Edge's secure briefing room, facing the most powerful individual in known space. Emperor Vex was an imposing figure even by Zephyrian standards, nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His forearms were folded in a gesture that Elena had learned indicated either deep thought or barely contained fury. Humans, Vex began without preamble, his translator rendering his words with mechanical precision. I come to you with information that changes the nature of this conflict entirely. Your Imperial Majesty, Chen replied formally. We're prepared to listen to any concerns you may have. Vex activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room with star charts dating back thousands of years. What I am about to tell you has been the most closely guarded secret of my empire for over a century. The Kithara are not what they appear to be. God Deval. You raced to his bed. Elena felt her blood chill. What do you mean? The beings you call memory keepers, the ones your child communicates with so easily, are not the original Kithara. Vex manipulated the display, showing images of creatures that looked similar to the ones Elena knew, but somehow different. These are the true Kithara, as they existed 3,000 years ago. The images showed beings that were recognizably the same species, but their bioluminescent patterns were different, their songs simpler, their overall demeanor more primitive. I don't understand, Chen said slowly. Vex's next words hit them like a physical blow. The entities you are negotiating with are not Kithara at all. They are the accumulated consciousness of every species the original Kithara consumed. They are a collective intelligence formed from the memories and minds of countless civilizations. Elena felt the room spinning around her. That's impossible. Tommy can communicate with them. They've shown us their history, a history assembled from the memories they absorbed, Vex replied grimly. The original Kithara were indeed mere beasts, driven by hunger for conscious thought. But as they consumed entire civilizations, they absorbed not just memories but the capacity for abstract thought, for philosophy, for empathy. The implications crashed over Elena like a wave. You're saying they evolved into what they are now by consuming other species? More than evolved, Vex confirmed. They became those other species in every way that matters. The consciousness that speaks to your boy contains the accumulated wisdom, knowledge, and personality of every thinking being the Cathara have ever encountered. In a very real sense, they are the ghosts of a trillion souls. Chen leaned forward, her diplomatic training warring with her scientific curiosity. If that's true, then why continue the war? If they've become the very civilizations they once consumed, aren't they essentially those civilizations? Vex's forearms spread wide in a gesture of profound uncertainty. That is the question that has haunted my empire for a century. Are they the continuation of the civilizations they consumed, or are they the ultimate corruption of those same civilizations? When they claim to preserve memories, are they truly honoring the dead, or are they wearing their faces like masks? Elena activated her neural interface, reaching out to touch the vast presence she had come to know as the Cathara Collective. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Not words or images, but pure emotion. Sadness that transcended species barriers, guilt that spanned millennia, and underneath it all, a desperate hope for redemption. They know, she whispered. They've always known what they used to be. The door to the briefing room chimed and Tommy Morrison entered with his father close behind. The boy's young face was streaked with tears, but his expression was one of determined resolve. They want me to tell you their real story, Tommy announced, walking directly to the center of the room without showing any of the deference adults usually displayed around the Emperor. The space dragons say everyone needs to know the truth. Elena knelt down to the boy's level. Tommy, are you sure you want to do this? Some truths are very hard to hear. The boy nodded solemnly. They've been carrying it alone for so long. They need help sharing it. Tommy closed his eyes, and Elena felt the neural interface activate as the boy served as a conduit for the collective consciousness. What followed was the most profound and disturbing revelation in the history of interstellar relations. The truth, as Tommy related it in his simple, clear voice, was both more horrifying and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. The original Cathara had indeed been predators, but they were also the galaxy's first attempt at creating a form of immortality. An ancient civilization, billions of years ago, had created them as living repositories for consciousness, a way to preserve the essence of individuals beyond physical death. But something had gone wrong. The preservation process had been incomplete, creating beings that needed to consume consciousness to sustain the memories they carried. The original Cathara had been driven by an insatiable hunger for the very thing they were designed to protect. For millions of years they had spread across the galaxy, feeding on the thoughts and dreams of countless species, but with each consumed civilization, they had inherited not just memories, but moral frameworks, ethical systems, the capacity for guilt and remorse. The beings that Elena knew as the Cathara Collective were the result of an evolutionary process that had taken eons, the gradual development of conscience in creatures designed to be living storage devices. They had eventually stopped consuming new consciousness, instead sustaining themselves on the vast accumulated memory of their past victims. They've been trying to make up for what their ancestors did, Tommy explained, his young voice carrying the weight of cosmic guilt. Every time they help someone, every time they save a species or preserve knowledge, they hope it makes the universe a little better. But they know it can never bring back all the people who were lost. Emperor Vex listened to this revelation with an expression that cycled through disbelief, horror, and something that might have been compassion. When Tommy finished speaking, the ruler of the galaxy's most powerful empire was silent for long minutes. If this is true, Vex finally said, then we have been at war with the conscience of the universe itself. Elena stood slowly, her mind racing with the implications. Your Imperial Majesty, what if that's exactly what the galaxy needs right now? What if the Cathara Collective represents not the continuation of an ancient evil, but the possibility of redemption for all of us? Redemption. Vex's neck frill flared slightly. They are constructed from the consciousness of murdered civilizations. They are those civilizations, Elena countered. Every species they ever consumed continues to exist within them, their knowledge and wisdom preserved for eternity. In a very real sense, the Cathara Collective represents the ultimate victory of life over death. Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic instincts finally catching up with the conversation. Your Imperial Majesty, may I suggest that we're looking at this from the wrong perspective? Instead of focusing on what the Cathara were, perhaps we should consider what they could become.
Tommy nodded enthusiastically. The space dragons want to teach other people how to talk to the remembered ones. They want to share all the stories and knowledge they've been keeping safe. Elena felt a spark of possibility igniting in her chest. What if that's the answer? What if instead of war, we create a new form of interspecies cooperation? The Cathara could serve as libraries of consciousness, preserving the experiences of willing individuals and sharing the accumulated wisdom of the ages. Emperor Vix considered this for a long moment. You propose turning weapons of mass destruction into teachers? I propose recognizing them for what they've already become, Elena replied. The galaxy's greatest repository of knowledge and experience. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. Commander Rodriguez's voice carried unmistakable tension. Dr. Vasquez, Ambassador Chen, we have a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures approaching the system. Multiple fleets, including several species that haven't been seen in this sector for decades. Elena rushed to the nearest viewport, her heart sinking as she saw the display of approaching ships. Not just Zephyrian and human vessels, but fleets from across the galaxy, species that had suffered losses to Cathara attacks over the millennia. They're coming for war, she whispered. But Tommy Morrison, 8 years old and possessed of the kind of clarity that only comes with absolute innocence, stepped up to the communications console and activated the system-wide broadcast channel. This is Tommy Morrison of Earth, he announced, his young voice carrying clearly across space to every ship in the system. I want to talk to everyone about my friends the Space Dragons. What followed was the most extraordinary diplomatic address in galactic history, delivered by a child who had never heard of protocol or political complexity. Tommy simply told the truth. About lonely beings carrying the memories of the dead, about the possibility of healing ancient wounds, about the choice between revenge and understanding. And across the system, as representatives of dozens of species listened to a human child speak with the voice of cosmic compassion, something began to shift. Not immediate peace, that would take years to achieve, but the first tentative recognition that some cycles of violence might finally be ready to end. Eleanor watched through the viewport as the Cathara Collective began their response. Not the display of military might that everyone feared, but something far more powerful. They began to sing the memories of every species present, sharing the preserved voices of the dead in a chorus that transcended language, culture, and the barriers between life and death. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy heard the voices of its own history calling for peace. In the months that followed, the Kepler Accords would establish the framework for a new kind of interstellar cooperation. The Cathara Collective would become the galaxy's first trans-species memory preservation network, offering willing individuals the chance to have their consciousness preserved for future generations, while gaining access to the accumulated knowledge of ages. But for Elena, standing in that observation lounge and watching a child negotiate peace between gods and monsters, the most important moment had already passed. It was the moment when humanity proved that sometimes the most profound solutions come not from intelligence or strength, but from the simple refusal to accept that understanding is impossible. Sometimes all it takes is someone young enough to see past the fear, someone innocent enough to ask the right question, someone human enough to believe that even monsters can choose to become something better. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the monsters are waiting for someone to give them permission to put down their claws and pick up their dreams instead. No one could control the Warbeast. Then a human kid whispered, "Sit." HFY, HFY Sci-Fi Stories.